Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
Back when I was, 36 or 37 years old, I had a friend, Tom, who was a runner. And I always thought, I'm kind of a fat slob here, and I just quit smoking. I just quit smoking, and I thought, this is my chance to get a little healthier. But Tom would run like 4 or 5 miles, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna run. I'm gonna start running. So I went out to the front of my house.
I think it was a big deal. I remember this, that you made a big deal. I'm going to start running.
I'm going to start
wow,
running.
Dad's running.
And so what I did is I went out to, we lived in the middle of the block. I got to the end of the driveway, and I ran to the end of the block. That was my first goal. And this is Transcendent.
How do we turn over a new leaf? How do we set goals like this?
Well, I discovered that thing to do if I wanted to turn over a new leaf, if I wanted to start something different, if I wanted to change my ways in some form. Take it in bites. And don't set long-term goals like, I'm going to lose 30 pounds. And then you get discouraged when you've only lost 3 and you don't want to lose anymore and you have to start over. Well, back to the running thing. My buddy Tom was a runner, and I thought, I'm going to run. So I ran that first day. I ran to the end of the block. Now, just put this into perspective. This is like 3 houses. And I thought, well, that's enough for today. And I went back, and the next day I went out and did it again. And eventually, I set my next goal to be, I want to go to the end of the block, and then I'm going to turn left and go 1 block. And when I made that, and I didn't make it, by the way, the next time I went out, I made it partway there. And I worked to it. Well, within about a week and a half, I made it to the end of the block and over to the next street. I thought I was doing really well. It took me a month to get to the point where I could run around the entire block without stopping.
That must have been quite a month for you as you're going through and thinking, well, Tom is doing all of this and I'm having trouble even doing the block. And yet you did it.
Actually, I didn't think I'm having trouble even doing the block. I'm thinking, hey, I made it a block already.
That's good.
And I was just looking at the positives. I wasn't setting my goal to be what Tom could do. I never even thought of that. I just thought, I'm going to be a runner too. And eventually I did. And so now here I was at 36 years old. And I eventually ran a block. And then eventually I ran 3 blocks down and around and and it did a thing that was 1.2 miles. I called it the big one.
You remember the big one. That was a big deal when you did the big.
Yes.
We talked about the big one in the family. We absolutely did.
That was, And when I did it twice, I was getting up to where I was getting close to the 3 miles. That was my goal. I didn't want to do any more than that. But it just became natural. I continued to set new goals. And actually, when I was 50 years old, I ran a marathon.
Mm-hmm. That was really neat when you did that.
Yeah, that was great. Anyway, the whole idea is setting short goals. I wasn't setting a goal thinking now my next goal is going to be another goal. It's another step toward the marathon. I never thought of that. I thought about my first goal was running around the block, real goal.
Now, where that can be hard, I think, is when you're coming back to something that you used to do. I know I went through that, but you got me running right away, right when you were running. So I was running right away when I was a kid. And then, of course, we ran in high school. That was a unit that we would do in Fayette. And then I was a runner through college. I would run off and on. And I know there was a long period where I didn't run. And then after we moved back here, I decided I'm going to go start running again. And it had probably been 5 years or more since I had run ever. But I remember doing all of those runs, doing, that it was no problem to do 2, 3, 4, 5 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out that very first time and I thought, well, I could do all of this. I'm a runner. I'm not like you were when had
Mm-hmm.
just quit smoking. This should be easy for me. And I tried to go out, and in my mind, I thought I should be able to do at least a couple miles. And I struggled to even get up to a mile. I went out into the track, and the high school has a track there, and that was really discouraging to me. I thought, oh, I can't even do a mile here. I used to be doing 2, 3 miles no problem, and I know I'm not the only one because my sister went through that as well when
Mm-hmm.
she had some health issues, and then she had to take some time off from running. She had to go, that was a big deal for her where she would do trail running. And then she had to take that time off. And when she came back, I know she said that same thing. She said, I want to feel like I can just bang this out and it's no problem. But I can't anymore because that's not where my body is at. So she and I both had to learn to set more realistic goals when we had set other goals that we knew we could attain before.
Now you look into this as relationships, and you're talking about relationships, and well, we uh, we used to get along. That there are two of us in our family, and we used to get along really well. I'm going to go back to that again. Well, maybe you're not going to go back to the marathon of getting along. You can't start there. You have to think, oh, I used to do that. I can do that again. No, you necessarily can't. But what you can do is set short term goals. You talked about turning over a new leaf. Turning over a new leaf sometimes means getting back to what we had, or it means getting to what I've seen my friends have, or it's what I want to have, and I can just go from 0 to 80. No, not necessarily. You have to take it a step at a time. You told the story yourself about the story with you and your daughter.
Yes, when I first transitioned, it was very difficult for her. And of course, this is what happens in all relationships is that we change. We continue to go through changes, and some of those changes are really positive for our relationships, and some of those can make real difficulties. And this was one that made a real difficult, it put a real obstacle in our relationship. And yes, that's right. I've told that story about how she had a very, very difficult time with that for about a month. And then we got together and we said, we're going to focus on one thing that we can do, and that's we can play a game. We sat down and we played that game, and she was able to focus on the game board, and I focused on the game board, and we were able to have a conversation. And once we finished that game, she said, I think I'm about done now. But it was the beginning of us restoring that relationship. And now we're back and everything is good. And I think that she's still disappointed. I think that in many ways she still feels like she lost a dad. But yet we still have a relationship. So it's maybe not what what we had beforehand. It's a different kind of relationship than we had beforehand. But it's a good relationship.
Yes, it's a strong relationship, and that's wonderful.
And I know that we are parent and child again in a way that we will sacrifice for one another, and we'll do all of the things that parents and children that we ought to be doing, that when we think about what an ideal parent-child relationship is, we have that again.
So one of the things that I learned when I decided that if there was something I was going to set a goal for, or I was going to turn over a new leaf for, it was the first thing I had to do is forget about the past, forget about what happened, because that will hold you back. It's sort of like me going out and taking that first run and saying, yeah, but I really can't because my ankle hurts. Yeah, but I really can't because I just don't have enough strength in my legs yet to do that. Well, I'm not suggesting that you start out to run a marathon. Do what you can. Stretch it, but do what you can. If you want to reestablish a relationship with someone in your family, brother, sister, uncle, it doesn't matter, third cousin, whoever it happens to be, if you want to reestablish a relationship, it's a relationship that somehow has become broken. And you want to reestablish that, the first thing you have to do, the first thing I have to do if I want to establish a relationship with somebody that I have been estranged with, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Let it go. You often will think, well, there's something that they did that's I have a hard time getting rid of that. Well, maybe you do have a hard time, but you got to get rid of it. Sometimes you could get together with someone and you could say, well, I can't believe, but back about 7 years ago, you did this thing and it really, really upset me. And the other person might honestly look at you and say, I don't even remember that. You've been harboring that all this time. Or I've been harboring it all this time. And the only person that suffered was me. I didn't even realize that's what's separating this relationship. So the first thing you have to do is, if there is anything at all, let it go.
I think a great way to do that can be, there's lots of ways that you can do it, but I know one of the ways that we used to do in camp when I was a camp counselor is you would write down the thing that you were trying to let go. You would write it down on a piece of paper. And then we would do a thing where everyone would take their pieces of paper and you'd put it up on a nail that was sticking out from a board, so that the pointy end was sticking out from the board. So it had been driven all the way through. And then everyone would come and take their piece of paper and they would drive it onto the nail so that you had a whole stack of papers on this nail, all driven right through the middle of the piece of paper. So you've got, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen pieces of paper or more. And then somebody would come with a lighter and would light those pieces of paper on fire. And they would all burn. And as they would burn, they would curl up and it would make a rose of ash. And the idea was, as we let it go, it brings something new that's beautiful. I think that there can be something very powerful in the act of writing it down. That you write something down and you say, and right now I am letting this go. I am forgiving this person. It's not an issue anymore. I am no longer holding it back against them. I no longer think that they owe me a debt. I forgive this debt and it's gone. And then you don't bring it up again. You don't let it be a thing again.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So you do that in the face of other people, or is it something you could just do privately by yourself?
I think it depends all on the situation. So one of the worst things you can do is to come up and say, if you don't need to have that conversation with somebody, you come up and say, hey, you know that thing that you don't remember at all? I've been really frustrated with you for the past several years, but good news is I forgave you for that. And now we can go on. Well, what healing did that bring? That doesn't bring anything. So really, you only want to talk to the person if there's something where you need resolution from them. And maybe it's a conversation that you need to have that you've been putting off. Now, if it's a conversation that you've already had this multiple times, and you already know how this one is going to go, it's probably something you do by yourself. But if it's a conversation that you've been putting off because it's hard, then maybe you need to take it that next step and go with them. I would suggest don't write it down then at that point. Instead, at that point, you want to make sure you're having the right conversation. And there's one of 3 conversations that you could be having. And I learned this from a book called Crucial Conversations. And they talk about how to have good conversations with somebody when things are difficult. And they talk about these 3 distinctions. And if you're having the wrong conversation, you can end up feeling really frustrated and walk away. But if you have the right conversation, it can go really well. The first conversation is if there was a specific event that you need to deal with. It was a one-time thing, but it's still just sitting with you and you can't just get over it. You've got to deal with it in the context of the relationship. You bring it up and say, you know what? I'm sorry that I haven't talked to you about this, but this thing has been really sitting with me. Can we talk about this? And you sit down, and as long as both of you are having a good faith conversation, you can move past that event. But now maybe you're past that stage already where this person, this is not a one-time event that has happened, but they've done this multiple times. If you try to sit down and have a conversation about this one event, that's not really what you're frustrated about. You need to have the second level of conversation, which is the pattern. You know, there's this pattern of things that you've been doing. Every time I come over here, I notice you like to make fun of me for the clothes that I wear. And it the first time was not a big deal, and the second time was not a big deal. The third time I said, hey, could you not do that? And you kind of chuckled it off, and it wasn't a big deal, but you keep doing it. And I want you to know it's really starting to weigh on me. So can we come up with something where we change? Because that's really hard for me. Okay, well, good. Now we're dealing with that. If you try to have the first conversation when you're supposed to be having the second conversation about the pattern, you're not really addressing what's driving at you.
You're going back to the history.
You're going back to the history, and we want to talk about future. We want to have a conversation about the future.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, maybe you had that conversation. Maybe you had that conversation multiple times, and you feel like that just doesn't go anywhere. Well, that's not the conversation you need to have anymore. Now you have the third level of conversation, and that is the conversation about the relationship. Hey, you know, every time I come over here, you think it's fun to make fun of my clothes. And I've talked to you about it now 2-3 times. Said, hey, that really hurts me. And you've acknowledged that hurts me. And yet you keep doing it. This is a hard one here because now it's moved beyond just the pattern of it hurting. But now I've talked to you about it, and now it's actually affecting the relationship. And so we need to figure out what we can do to deal with the relationship. If you have the conversation about the pattern when you need to be talking about the relationship, you're going to walk away frustrated. If you have the conversation about the relationship when you just need to talk about the one specific time that happened, you're really having the wrong relationship. You need to make sure that you pick the right one of the three, or you're not having the right conversation. It's like when you come up and you try to put in an order at a restaurant, and you're ordering the wrong thing, and it comes, and what you really wanted was a salad, but you asked for it the wrong way, and they brought you out the whole meal, and you thought, I didn't really want the whole meal. Or you wanted the whole meal, but you only asked for the salad. If you don't have the right conversation, you can't. If you don't set the agenda for the right conversation, you can't have the right conversation.
One of the things a technique that people use when they are faced with a difficult conversation is either they or the other person will deflect that by bringing up something else. Instead of saying, well, you just spoke to me about the fact that I criticized your clothes, but what about X? You criticized me for X and Y and Z. No, that's a different conversation. This is the conversation we're having now. And then you can go back to that, and you can equate one to the other, and you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper down, and you're not solving the problem at hand.
And maybe you're not ready for any of those conversations yet, in which case you might need to have, and we talked about this a few episodes, a conversation about a meta-communication conversation. Hey, there are some things that I'd like to talk to you about, but I don't know that we're at a place where we can really have that conversation because I'm worried that it might turn into a screaming match. I don't want to have that conversation, but could we have a conversation about, when we're not in a screaming match, about what we can do when we're in a screaming match to keep things toned down? When you're not mad at me and I'm not mad at you, can we talk about what we can do to make sure that we both know how to get along in those times? I know when I was married, we had this conversation and it went really well. Now, it didn't solve all of the problems, but we discovered that um, I have my communication style is that when I'm feeling hurt, I shut down and I don't want to talk because I'm feeling hurt until I get pushed to the wall. And then then I get really angry. And of course, then my ex was the other, that when there's a problem, she wants to talk it through and make sure that we keep talking. And so when I would shut down, she would talk more, which would then make me push away farther, which would then make her talk more. And we discovered when we sat down and talked about this, this seems to be our pattern that we have. What can we do beforehand? How can we script out our next fight so that the next time we have a fight, it doesn't devolve into this thing? And we realized that we each had a thing that we could do to get out of it. I could learn to say, I'm feeling really hurt right now, and it's actually really hard for me to talk. I just need some space for a little bit. And that one, I actually had to learn. I wrote that phrase out, and I memorized the phrase because in that moment, I was not coherent enough to be able to say something that made sense. So I had to memorize the phrase. And she learned how to say, I'm feeling really hurt right now because you're not talking to me. And I just want to know that you care as much about this thing as I do. And then I would realize, I'm not talking. So, and she had to memorize that phrase. So we had these two little things. And again, it didn't always work, but it cut out about half of the problems that we had because one of us could break out of the cycle. And then we would say, we just need some space. Let's come back and talk about this after we've had a time to cool down. And that helped out a lot.
One of the things about resolutions is I will tell you that you don't have to wait for New Year's Day to make a resolution. You can pick any day at all to make a resolution. But actually, what's really good about the New Year's Day resolution that's interesting is that some people will pick a resolution weeks or maybe even months in advance and say, at the beginning of next year, I'm going to do X. And they'll actually pick that day in the future and they'll get to it. But they often don't stick with it. Most often don't stick with it. They don't make it true. Well, there's a couple of techniques we can use to make it true, those kinds of things. First of all, you can pick any time for a resolution. You can pick 4th of July. Or you can pick Labor Day or Memorial Day. Or you can pick a week from Tuesday. Or you can pick at 10 o'clock tonight. The idea is pick something in the future, but know when you hit that, you're going to do that. And then the next thing, get started with a one-time resolution or a one-time goal. Like my goal, I'm just going to make it to the corner. And that was my one-time resolution. I'm going to make it to the corner. 3 houses. And I did it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
This year, I don't normally pick resolutions for the year. I think that usually the things that come up in my life that I want to change come up organically at different times. This is not usually a time where things come up. But I've got a few things that I'm kicking around that this year is different for me, where I think, actually, I have a couple things that I want to do. But one of them is I've discovered I'm watching a lot of YouTube on my phone right now. So I have a resolution. It's a one-time resolution that I pay for the paid service so I don't have to watch the ads. Those stupid little 3-second ads. I know that I would watch a lot less YouTube if I got rid of that service. So I've decided I'm making a one-time resolution that I'm going to cancel that service. And who knows, I might decide a month or two down the road, I really actually liked my life better when I was able to watch YouTube without those stupid ads, and I might add that back in. But to start with, this is at least what I'm going to do because I don't have to make that resolution day after day after day. It's a one-time thing that I do, and then it's done.
Good idea. You know, I can do resolutions too, and I have. And sometimes I follow through, and sometimes I haven't. But one of the things that I like to do, I'd call it a hobby, although it's become more than that at times, is that I happen to be a writer, and I've written a lot of things. I'm also a member of a writers group, and when we go to the writers group, we meet twice a month. When I go to the writers group, everybody's supposed to bring something they wrote. I fell into the habit of bringing something that I wrote maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then I'd bring it in because I didn't really have time to write anything. So I'd come back and do some other things. But one of the things they say a writer should do, you should write every day. And yes, that's true. But in reality, you don't have to write every day. I know Stephen King does. Stephen King writes every day. He means 365 days a year. Sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes for 4 hours. But write every day is what they say. And that's something that, as a writer, I should get back to. I let that one go. And if I go back to writing every day, and I don't set these ridiculous goals, yeah, I'm going to go and sit down and write for 3 hours. That's challenging. But if I say I'm going to write every day, and I don't put the restrictions on it, I might write for 10 minutes. I might write for 20 minutes. And what's interesting about this is, as I'm thinking about it, right, the reason this is coming up is right now I'm in the process of publishing a book. And I'm getting fairly close, and I expect to have it done within the next probably 2 to 3 months. But what's interesting is I've got a lot of other little stories out there, and I've got many of them that are unfinished. And I think that's probably something in the back of my mind that says it's unfinished because that's my nature. I don't want to maybe close it.
Mm-hmm.
You ever walk into somebody's house, a guy that has done a lot of work for himself, and he's done all kinds of repairs in his house, but none of them are quite done. Here's the entire bathroom has been remodeled. It looks great. He's just got to put the molding on. And then, oh yes, and over in this corner, he's got this all done, and he laid the carpet. He just hadn't tacked it down yet. And throughout the house, you see this guy with all of this stuff. And there's something that says, why have I not finished it? What is it? What is it that, is that closure that says, I can't admit that I'm done? I don't know. It's interesting.
I think you're right, though, that the biggest changes that I've made in my life have almost never started on January the 1st.
Correct.
Because that's not usually organically when we have those things come up. And you know, if that guy were to say, I'm going to finish all of my projects, see, that would be a one-time thing. He could say, I'm going to put that molding on my bathroom. That's going to be what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get that done. That would be a great resolution because it's a one-time thing. You can either do it or not do it. It's not something that you fall away from after a while. And those are things, I think my best resolutions have typically come around December 12th. And I don't know why, but I've just had those happen a lot where I think, you know, I'm not going to wait for January the 1st. And I don't know when you're listening to this. Maybe you're listening to this on February the 19th. Perfect. February 20th is a perfect day to start. Your New Year's resolution can be your February 20th resolution or whenever you are. Just make sure you don't pick the second Tuesday of next week. That's not going to work so well.
Yeah. So we gave you a few ideas here. We're talking about resolutions. We're talking about having difficult conversations and moving from one step to the next, to the third, and not regressing, but moving forward through those steps to resolve situations like that, which ties in perfectly with resolutions you make and things you want to do, moving from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And now we're going to ask you to move to step 4, which is tell your friends about our podcast. This is your step 4. And get out there and tell them if you've heard something you like, we'd like to hear from you as well. And all you have to do is send us an email at trandysendit.com.
trandysendit@gmail.com.
Yes. And we will address your resolutions. We've done a few of those, or not your resolutions, your questions. We've done a few of those in the past, and we'd like to hear from you again. And if there's a subject you'd like us to address, we really want to hear about that. We'll do some research, and we'll be happy to talk a little bit more about that. So until next time, well, thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you again on trandysendit@gmail.com.
And have a happy new year.